in 1970. And it was very different then. I want to tell a couple stories very quickly and wrap up with the ethics change. One, the first one, comes from my childhood when I knew Dad was a study subject. The story was he came back from World War II. He was a pharmacist mate, first class. And he had already gotten his PhD. So he was in a medical research unit. And one day he came home and told Mom, I am likely to get very sick. Very sick. Do not call the doctor. Call Al. Al knows what's going on. And he got very sick, and she called Al, and Al came over and doctored and nursed or whatever he did, and Dad was fine. He lived for many years and was a professor. I always wondered. Years later, I read Operation Whitecoat, talked with Art Anderson when I was now adult, and I discovered that yes, indeed, there was such a study. Yes, indeed, he could go back in the records and find out that Dr. Heath was a subject. Never told me what it was. It's still classified. He had informed consent. There was a secondary subject. My mother was scared silly. I think it was the plague. I think he was given the plague. We'd never think of it today. Ethics change. When I was first doing the work I do, secretaries were to be seen and not heard. And in fact, in my first job, I wore little bitty heels. And we had short skirts. This was the 70s again, very short skirts. And women were secretaries and men were managers. Those things changed too, thank heavens. My mentor, Dr. Leslie L. Bennett at UCSF, sent a secretary to the Hastings Center workshop. Remember? 1 week for a secretary. And it changed my life around. Karen Lebach, Bob Levine were the facilitators. Bob Levine was the youngest, handsomest guy. Ooh, he was hot. And I would never interrupt him. Never. Well, about 2 years later, I'm on a panel sitting next to Bob Levine. And there had just been an article about male interrupters of females. And I would reach for the microphone, and Bob would cut right in and say, well, and make very important. And they were. And there were more. And finally, I just took the microphone, pulled it in front of me, and said, and now my turn. Times change. Times change. There's years ago, we had a primer meeting, it was arena meeting, on the Tuskegee study, where I learned it wasn't the Tuskegee study, it was the USPHS study on syphilis in the Negro male. And there was a panel. I was sitting in the back, and there was this panel, and there was this middle-aged black man who worked at NIH and had been a young civil rights activist. Do you remember this guy? He was profound because he had heard about this study early, and it hadn't made an impression on him. He didn't think anything of it. Only after it became news did he suddenly say, I knew about that. Why? Why didn't I do something? Why did it take reporter going to Albuquerque and breaking the news story. Those notions of what was unethical changed. So you mentioned that perceptions changed, and I want to say, and that what is going on now, we could be having another Tuskegee, but we don't know it. We may be accepting it. And my story is constant vigilance. Constant vigilance, because we are always trying to do the right thing. None of us set out to do the wrong thing. But it takes coming to primer meetings and hearing this dear man who had his epiphany to learn that what we're doing may not be seen as just as nice as we think it is 10 years from now.